Hello, is this mod abuse? Is this mod abuse?
Hello and welcome to our news coverage today of the CMHOC second general election. We apologize for the delay and are working out a few technical hiccups. We expect everything to be on track soon. All right, I think we've worked out that communication issue. Stand by, please.
Testing. Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
All right, hopefully that means our sound issues are fixed. Just one moment as we double check the satellite transmission.
Eddie, can you hear me right now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Now that we have this finally solved, we can begin our coverage. What would you like this? Can you just begin by telling us what we should be expecting through the night?
Okay, excellent. The satellite coverage, we now have full communication. I apologize. I'm sorry, can you ask that question again? I was making sure everything was working sound-wise.
Right. What do you think we should be expecting as the night goes along?
Well, this is one of the more interesting elections we've had. As you know, we've switched to a parallel system, and that shakes things up quite a bit. Now, with our outgoing parliament, currently we have, I think it's 9 members for both the United Conservatives and the NDP. I think tonight we will be expecting to see the NDP will not be able to keep their full share. The question is if the Conservatives will be able to and if they'll in fact grow from that.
Right. And based on the polling, what do you think will happen? In fact, to the Conservatives, do you think they're in majority territory right now?
That's a tricky thing because of the way the parallel system works and the amount of ridings. Now, the Conservatives are competing in 7 of the 9 ridings. All of the major parties are. But the Conservative leader, Smith, has actually been challenged in his own seat by an independent. Now, if the Conservatives can manage to win all 7 of the seats that they're contesting, there's a very good chance that they will form a majority. I would say it's almost certain. But if they start losing those individual seats to other people, that's when you could start to see with some problems and some issues. Now, I do want to go into detail about some of the technicalities of the way the system works and some of the things I think some of the voters might have been a bit confused by. And in fact, some of the parties themselves were telling us they were a bit confused. Now, in this system, one of the things we have is a list, and this is popular in many countries that use different kinds of proportional representation. But because we use a parallel system that is sort of, it's not exactly, but sort of in a way similar to the Japanese system, you need to be able to discount those people who actually do manage to get elected in the ridings. So what that means is let's say Ontario, which has 3 ridings and 3 list seats, that ideally for your list, you want to put 6 people up for your Ontario list, 3 of which are contesting in the ridings. This way, if you happen to win all 3 Ontario ridings, those extra 3 people could still will come on the list if you get enough vote. Now, there's also some confusion about the national or leveling list. Now, leveling seats are used in places like Norway, Sweden, and many Scandinavian countries, as well as other countries all around the world. The leveling seat is simply there to make sure that that final proportional result is actually proportional. Because if you only go region by region, you might have, for example, a party that has just not enough votes to win in every region, but when you add it on a national scale, they should have won seats. So the leveling seats are there to be able to say to that party, here is your seat. We are leveling out the results to make sure it's a fair playing field for all parties. So in the interplay between the two systems is where you have a parallel system. In a purely proportional system, what you end up with is the final electoral results in terms of the total number of seats won is equal to that percentage of the vote. What we have is a parallel system. The final seats won equal to the percentage is only the list seats. So it's only those 12 list seats that is going to actually equal the percentage of the vote and is going to be decided by proportional representation. The other seats are run on a parallel system, and that parallel system is completely separated and independent from that list. So this will allow you to have a majority instead of a lot of minorities like proportional countries frequently have.
All right, thank you for that. Now we're about to go to our first result. Apologies if my audio sounds a bit choppy. It's beyond my control right now, but hopefully it'll get better as the night goes along and as our magical technicians fix the satellite. So our first result today will be coming in from Quebec City. But first, let's talk a bit about the polling. In terms of polling, right, according to the last poll that we had before the campaign ended, the UCP is well ahead at 46.5%. In second place is the Liberals, who are fighting very closely with the NDP for second place, with the Liberals currently on 27% and the NDP on 26%, separated by less than a point. But the UCP is far, far ahead of them at 19, with a lead of 19.1% over both parties. What this will, how many seats this will translate to throughout the night will be an open question, but it seems that the UCP is definitely on track to gain many seats. So we are now preparing to go to our first result, which is in Quebec City. Now, Quebec City is not a competitive riding because only a single candidate stood, which is the Liberal leader, Mr. Sir Vibe, because of a parliamentary convention that states that leaders should not be, that other parties should not be standing within the seats of leaders. So because Vibe has no opposition here, the result is pretty much self-evident. But we shall report on it anyways, and rather unsurprisingly, Mr. Sir Vibe has won the seat of Quebec with 1.2 million votes and no opposition. Now, this result doesn't tell us much since there was no campaigning done in the riding, but it gives us an idea of how Eastern Canada might turn out, since the Liberals are now managed to turn out 1.2 million people despite being in a single candidate riding. Teddy, do you have any opinions on the Quebec results?
Well, it is interesting to see that turnout, which I'm hearing is somewhere in the neighborhood of 40–45%. And what this tells us is that there is definitely a base amount of voters that are going out, especially to mark that ticks on the list, even in these acclamation ridings. So I do think we will see a turnout at the end of the night that will be about level with what we're used to in this country, 60 to 65%. Additionally, sorry, we're still having some minor communications difficulties. Additionally, I did want to add on the poll that we saw that it's interesting in terms of how close the NDP and the Liberals are. Now, the actual results from that poll was from a few days ago, and the NDP has been trending down. So some of the question is the NDP the trend? Is that strong enough so that the Liberals will be able to take additional seats over the list over the NDP, or is that trend not strong enough to push the NDP down that far?
All right, thank you. Now the results are about to come in for our first real competitive result of the evening in Atlantic Canada. Now, Atlantic Canada was very much a three-horse race. You had pretty major candidates standing for both the NDP and the UCP, and you had a candidate who's pretty familiar to Canadians standing for the Liberals as well. You had, for the NDP, you have veteran lawmaker Sinartos, who, after a few brief stints in the Radical Socialist Party, the Conservative Party, and I believe the Liberal Party, is now standing once again for the Conservative Party against Polaris 13427K, who was a major player on the NDP campaign last time. So this is a result this is a riding which was pretty hard fought, although Sinartos reportedly had a lead coming into the campaign. And we're now about to see how the result is going to turn out. In Atlantic Canada, Sinartos has been elected with 646,000 votes, far surpassing the second place candidate, Far Too Much Pressure, who only had 206,000. And now, this is the biggest surprise in this riding, Polaris 13427K, who was a pretty important figure in the NDP over the last term, has come in third place with 140,000 votes. What do you make of this, Teddy?
Well, that result for Polaris, or Orange as he's known to some of his friends, is definitely surprising. He had a very strong term, and I think the NDP was expecting him to be a star in the region. But the person I want to talk about is Mr. Far Too Much Pressure, or Fart to his friends. I mean, he really blew through this riding on his campaign, and it's just astounding to watch someone who came in not necessarily so strong coming out of the term, but who could do such a good result when you consider not only Sinartos, but Orange both had very strong terms. But when Fart came in and just blew through the entire Atlantic, I really think that that is why he is in second, why he has 200,000 votes for someone who's relatively new. And that this is why you are seeing that strong Liberal result.
Thank you. So it seems that the margin is very large, though. 646,000 for a candidate who, by any account, should have been pretty embattled since he defected, 2-3 times throughout the campaign? Throughout the past term, pardon?
That is true, but there is part of the Atlantic spirit that likes the maverick. That is especially true in Newfoundland, but you will find that spirit across the Atlantic, where the maverick is seen in a very good light. And I think that Sinartos embodies that very well. He is a bit of a maverick, and that's why they like him. I think that's why they've elected him.
Thank you. And now for an announcement for our viewers at home who are watching this stream. If you would like better quality audio, you can now join on the Discord server, the CBC Radio Canada channel, although you will be muted and will not be able to talk. So if you would like lifetime audio without the technical difficulties, please join that channel and please mute the YouTube audio stream.
A note for viewers who are taking this option, because of the time delay in our satellite uplink, you will hear things before you see them. So that is why it is important that if you are watching at home on your televisions, that you do press that mute.
Thank you. While the result in the Atlantic clearly shows an early sign of a conservative lead, and indeed maybe of a conservative wave that might be about to storm Canada, now is the time to see if that will pan out as we head further into our campaigns. The next riding that will be called imminently will be Montreal, where likewise there has been a fairly competitive two-way race between the Conservative Party and one of the two other parties, in this case, the Liberals. You had Claudia McFrost, who led a very enthusiastic campaign throughout Montreal, and you had Lizalta for the Liberals, who also led a very active campaign, although the third candidate, the power band of the NDP, wasn't seen very much throughout the election. So, without further ado, we are now about to move on to Montreal's result. And in Montreal, the result has been fairly close, with Claudia McFrost winning with 962,000 votes to second place Lizalta's 813,000. The power band for the NDP trails far behind in third place at 210,000. This is actually quite a major shift for the Montreal area, since in the past general election, the NDP controlled 2 of the 3 ridings within the current riding of Montreal. Malgrave held the seat of Montreal for quite a long time, and before that, Hurricane, aka myself, had won it for the NDP by quite a large margin. And in the South Shore riding of Montérégie-Estrie, in fact, the current Prime Minister, Emma, had held that seat in the past, and now the NDP has completely collapsed from holding 2 of the 3 seats in the region to polling at a distant third place. Teddy, what do you make of these results?
Well, what we're seeing here is the result of the campaign. And I apologize in advance with my poor French. I may butcher some place names. But generally what you see is the Conservatives might do well in the outer areas at times, but also on the West Island. When you have numbers this big, I think what you're seeing is perhaps a Conservative wave that might just sweep the entire country. Now, I know the Conservatives have been polling well within the Eastern region, but all 3 of these candidates are fairly new, let's say, and what you really saw, especially if you were on the streets of Montreal, was this out-and-out, drag-out battle between the Conservative and Liberal candidate for the riding. The NDP candidate, unfortunately, didn't seem to be anywhere to be found. I think that probably hurt the campaign, and it's why we see the NDP so far back in third.
This is really a deplorable show, though, for the NDP, given that they held 2 of the 3 ridings in this area over the past term. Only the North Shore riding of Northern Quebec was held by the Liberals this time around during the last election.
Well, it is a bit of a letdown, I would think, for the NDP, but you have to remember that their former MP was an all-star. I mean, he was one of the best speakers in the House. He was somebody who could really get work done, really work with people, and frankly, people who knew him said he was a very smart person. So it would be very difficult for anyone to follow up on her.
Well, Teddy, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
I hear you.
Just checking. Oh, why? So our next result will be on the Eastern Canada list. Now that the 3 ridings for Eastern Canada have been declared, we can move on to the list seat, which encompasses the entirety of the region. Now, in the last poll before the general election, the UCP had a massive lead here of 56%. In second place, the Liberals were only at 23.4%, so the lead was of 32.6 percentage points, which is quite simply a massive gulf. And the NDP, once again, trails in third place at 20.6%. Now, the NDP and the Liberals have both stepped up campaigning during the last day after this poll came out. But whether they'll be able to bridge this massive gulf will remain to be seen, and it looks fairly unlikely. And as we can see from the results now, that UCP has pretty much retained its absolute majority of support in Eastern Canada. It currently leads by 19.7% with all precincts reporting. And the Liberals have made up some gains to 31%, but it seems to mostly have been at the expense of the NDP rather than the Conservatives. And the NDP has been reduced to a pitiful number in the teens, 18%, winning absolutely no seats on the list to the Liberals 1 and the Conservatives 2. The UCP is now ahead at 4 seats with the Liberals at 2. This clearly shows major gains across Eastern Canada for the UCP, and if it's any indication of the night to come, this will be a very blue night for Canada. Teddy, your thoughts?
Now, what you see here is going to be key. What you see here might just get the UCP their majority. If they are going to be able to get 2 of these 3 list seats in the various parts of the country, they definitely are going to lock up that majority. I mean, we really need to see a lot of ridings go to other parties for that not to happen at this point. For the NDP, this has to be devastating. They're completely shut out of the region. And that showing, I think, is part of that trend I was talking about earlier. It's just that downward trend as the election continued, where there was just less and less of what had happened over the term that was mattering, and voters were more and more taking the campaign into account. I think that's why the Liberals did take up a bit as well, because they ran a fairly strong campaign across the country. Not as strong as the Conservative campaign, as we're seeing tonight, but still fairly strong.
Now, as we start moving towards Ontario, it's going to be interesting to see whether this trend can keep up, since we know that historically, certain parts of the East, especially Quebec, have bucked the national trend quite a few times. We'll see if this is still the case tonight, or if they'll be joining the rest of the country in inaugurating a major mandate for a Conservative government. But first, let's go for a recap of Eastern Canada. So the UCP has won 2 list seats and 2 ridings for a total of 4 seats, while the Liberals are on 1 of each. The NDP, as Teddy mentioned earlier, has been completely locked out of Eastern Canada, which is a very major blow, given that they once held 3, if not 4 ridings in Eastern Canada during the last general election, including most of Quebec and Prince Edward Island.
Now, I actually have here with me, I have the list, and it does appear, if my numbers are correct, that Lasetta, excuse me if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, has won that Liberal list seat. For the Conservatives, the only person who we have on that list seat for the East alone is Poldelsky or Valiant, and somebody else from their leveling list will end up taking that second seat.
Thank you. But now we are heading across the Ottawa River and going to the riding of Erie, or Southern Ontario, where there was also a fairly major race with very important players on all 3 sides. For the Conservatives, you have Dominion of Canada, who's been one of their strongest voices in Parliament and a major part of their party leadership. For the Liberals, you have Vanilla Donut, who is likewise, I believe, the deputy leader of the Liberals, and has also played a major role within the party, especially after the messy transition when Red Wolf resigned and defected to the NDP. And for the NDP, you have Adolfred. Am I pronouncing this wrong? I'm probably
He's Fred to his friends.
Right. So you have Fred for the NDP. I believe he started out this term as a member of the Radical Socialist Party, and he did compete in the by-election for the Radical Socialist Party, but he's since joined the NDP. He's a fairly well-known name across Canada, so it should be interesting, and in fact, all of 3 of them are, so it should be fairly interesting to see the results in this key riding. This riding if my memory serves correctly, encompasses large parts of southern Ontario, including Windsor, Hamilton, Niagara Falls, and St. Catharines. And the results show a pretty overwhelming landslide for Dominion, who has 1.4 million votes to the Liberals' 200,000. This is, I believe, the largest margin we've seen so far in this general election. And if this keeps up, it's very good news for the Conservatives and very bad news for both other parties. And once again, the NDP trails in third place at 141,000 votes. This is a much bigger margin than you would expect from three major star candidates. And it just goes on to show the extent to which the UCP campaign has convinced many Canadians, it seems, both in the East and in Ontario, to support their cause and to inaugurate a new rightist government in Canada. Teddy, your thoughts?
Well, I actually have some inside information here that may be applicable. I know that Dominion had run in previous elections and was kind of known for his high energy rallies. I mean, the crowd was always cheering when he was talking. But one of the things that I think the party strategist said to him, at least from the strategists that I've spoken to, is to shorten it up, is to keep things concise, not to talk for too long. And what I saw was when he really worked at that, on keeping things really short and really hard hitting, he was really excelling. Those rallies just amps up to 11. I think this massive number, over 1 million votes, over both of his opponents combined. I think that massive number is what you see when you do that, when you're able to get your point down to a very small, hard package and just hit it out of the park. These are the kind of results that you will get. But it is a little bit sad in that all three of them are the sort of people that I think are potential future prime ministers. And it has been unfortunate that fate just happened to put them all in the same riding in this election.
And now we have some breaking news for you. Before we go to the next result, CBC can now project that the United Conservative Party will form the next government of Canada. We do not yet know whether this will be a majority or a minority government, but it is now almost absolutely certain that they are definitely on track for a plurality of the seats in the next Canadian Parliament. This is a very early time to project it, but we feel that there's no other path for other parties to claim the majority or the plurality even at this point, and the UCP is well on track to meeting our expectations of a government. Teddy, how do you think yes, carry on.
That's not surprising at all. I think we've all expected the UCP to win. I've spoken to people in the Liberals and the NDP, and both of them as well were expecting the Conservatives would be the winners at the end of the night. I think the question is if they can get that majority mark or not. That still remains.
Right, that is indeed a very big question. It'll depend a lot on some pretty key races that we've seen so far, including very competitive ones in Northern Ontario and British Columbia, along with list performance. If the NDP and the Liberals can make up for their string of losses so far by increasing their margin of popular vote on the lists and winning more seats. But we'll see soon enough as we are ready now for another result in Toronto. Now, Toronto, despite being Canada's largest city, was not competitive at all since it was the seat of Emma, our incumbent prime minister and the leader of the NDP. No one stood against Emma, so the result is pretty much a given. But now we can see how big the margin is, and she has been elected in Toronto with 1.3 million votes, slightly higher than Vibe's result in Quebec. Now, this is not a surprise to anyone, but it does mean that the NDP is finally on the map as we go along and head out west. This result, well, there's not much to talk about here since there was a single candidate and they were essentially acclaimed.
This is still a bit of a win for the Prime Minister. In terms of turnout, we are seeing very similar to what we saw when Vi was elected in Quebec. And I know the two of them didn't spend much time in either of their ridings. I think they did some lawn sign drops, but that's about it. So we are seeing it's still a win for the Prime Minister who takes her seat, but she will not be the Prime Minister when the night.
Thank you. Yeah, that much is pretty evident by now. And we'll finally see what kind of situation the NDP truly is in as we head to Northern Ontario, perhaps the most competitive of any of the ridings in this general election. Now here, it was a three-horse race, really, since all three candidates were extremely active. You had a broken hero, aka Barbara, for the Conservative Party, and you had our former Prime Minister, Red Wolf 177, for the NDP, as long as, a relative newcomer, but who ran a very passionate campaign for the Liberals. Now, the result here could really tell us much about the state of the NDP, since Red Wolf is considered their strongest candidate by far, having mounted an extremely active campaign and having been very active during the past term in Parliament. If he can't win for the NDP in this riding, then really the question to ask is, who can? And before we go to the results, Teddy, do you have any thoughts on this to add?
This has been infamous as one of the closest races in the country, if not the closest, although the Prairies and Territories, we understand, is also pretty close. But turnout, I can tell you the turnout figures, an astounding 85% turnout in this riding. We have not seen that before. That is an astounding turnout.
That is quite amazing. Well, now it's time to see who wins. And in a fairly competitive race, Red Wolf 177 has won Northern Ontario for the NDP. Perhaps the first piece of good news so far for the New Democrats in what has been so far quite a blue evening. Red Wolf has won the seat with 952,000 votes, to second place Barbara's 873,000, and in third place the Liberals have a respectable 655,000. So this was a pretty evenly matched race, and it seems that the NDP has managed to get people within Northern Ontario to see its message and to give it one more chance in government, although it seems that the rest of Canada might disagree on that. Teddy, thoughts?
What really catches my attention is just how well Idaho has actually done with 655,000 votes. We knew this was going to be a close race between the top two, and it looks like the NDP's come out on top, which will kind of crush the Conservative hopes of taking all 7 of their contested seats. But that is a very narrow margin in terms of percentage of popular vote. We are looking at, let me check my numbers here, 38.39% to 35.19%. Like, we're talking slightly over 3 percentage points. That is a very narrow margin of victory. And it does look like Red Wolf, who had an let's call it an interesting move from his old party to his new, that the voters perhaps are saying that they've forgiven him for that.
Right. And I believe we have the former Prime Minister on the line with us. Do you mind giving a bit more commentary while we try to get him into the studio?
Yeah, it'll be great to hear from him for sure. Oh, sorry, we're just getting the mic hooked up.
Hello?
Hello. Yes. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be on the show. I'm a big fan.
Thank you.
So, I just wanted to comment on the results that we've seen tonight. Obviously, the Conservatives have seen a pretty big, call it a blue wave. Obviously, I just want to say I don't think this is a rejection of progressive values. I think what the Liberals and NDP have done in the past term, and most of this is my fault, we failed to implement the progressive values that I think Canadians care about, and this is a pushback against us. I don't think what the UCP represents really what Canada is and what Canadians are about. I think this is more a failure of the NDP and the Liberals in the past term. And again, I think I'm going to put the blame on myself for what I did. And I just want to apologize for all of that. But we see in Northern Ontario, we got to bring together this coalition of francophones, of Indigenous Canadians, of organized labor, of young people. I remember when I was campaigning in Ottawa, we had students from Algonquin and Carleton, where I went to university, and Ottawa U. Got this huge coalition to come together. And I know this has been a rough night for the NDP, but I'm really happy to see this result, and I really hope I can do the best job representing Northern Ontario in Parliament this term.
All right, well, thank you for coming in. But since it looks like you're going back to Ottawa, what do you think should be the NDP's priority this term? Like, where would you start rebuilding your party?
I want to go back to the roots of the NDP. A big thing we tried to do for my campaign this election is we tried to involve organized labor, just where the NDP really comes from, where the merger of the CFF or CCF, sorry, and Canadian Labour Congress. And we want to bring in organized labor and be the party that fights for the working people. The UCB talked about lowering your taxes, but that's going to lead to cuts to services. They're not fighting for the working people. They're not fighting for organized labor. That's a great place to start. We also want to fight for marginalized people, which we've done forever. Especially in my riding, there's a lot of Indigenous Canadians. In Ottawa, we have the Gay Village. And we've always had a long history of fighting for the LGBT community, so we're going to go back to that, fighting for the little guy. That's what we want to be in Parliament this term. All
right. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Red Wolf, for phoning in today from Northern
Thank you.
Ontario.
I'm in Stonecliffe, Ontario, where I have my sheep farm.
Thank you, and good luck with your sheep farming.
Thank you.
I think those are some very magnanimous remarks that we heard from the former Prime Minister, taking personal responsibility for the loss that we're seeing for the NDP and the Liberals. And I think that there still is a bright future for him.
Yes, indeed. And now we are ready to go to what I believe should be the Ontario list. Yes. And now currently on the screen, what we have is the last regional poll, which once again shows a pretty familiar pattern by now, with the Conservatives in first place at 48.3%, the Liberals in second place at 28%, and the NDP trailing both at 23%. The lead here for the UCP is about 20 percentage points, which is fairly large, but not insurmountable, although it is very unlikely that the Liberals will pull off an upset. They did show quite a bit of activity during the last days of campaigning, and it might reflect on them here. So let's see the results. Once again, we're seeing a pattern that's pretty much identical to the one we saw in Quebec, with 2 seats to the UCP and 1 seat to the Liberals. The UCP's popular vote margin is a bit down from the poll, but well within the margin of error at 46.5%, and their lead has shrunk by about 5 points, with the Liberals now on 32%. The NDP is far behind at 21%, and it seems a lot of the Liberal support has come at the expense of the left rather than the right, which on one hand does help the Liberals edge out the NDP for one more seat, but it does deny them the opportunity to form a coalition with the NDP to deny the UCP a majority, which they seem fairly on track to accomplish this election. Teddy, your thoughts?
Well, in terms of the list seat, it looks like Barbara, who lost Northern Ontario to Red Wolf, will get in on that first UCP list seat, along with Ice Cream 420. Now, for the Liberals, they made an interesting list decision. They put Nata Bonobo ahead of Vanilla Donut. So Nata Bonobo will be elected first on that Ontario list. Now, there is something interesting about Vanilla Donut and Adelfred, who both ran against Dominion of Canada. They are very high on their national lists. All the Liberals need is 1 leveling seat, and all the NDP needs is either 1 seat out west and a leveling seat, or 2 leveling seats, and both Vanilla Donut and Adelfred will be going back to the House of Commons.
That's interesting. But now, as you can see from the diagram at the bottom of the screen, the UCP is very well ahead of both the Liberals and the NDP, and they're more than halfway to the point where they can reach a parliamentary majority. With the West and the National List both still having to declare, this seems like a very This seems like very good news for the UCP, and it seems like a cause to celebrate, especially for Smith, the UCP leader, who led a very energized party on this campaign. Our next, now that we are past Ontario, first we shall go to the Ontario recap, which shows, in this case, the UCP on 2 list seats and the NDP on 1. The Liberals on 1, the NDP having been edged out of a seat. And in terms of ridings, you see the UCP winning Erie. You see the NDP winning Northern Ontario and Toronto, although the riding balance here is a bit skewed by the fact that no one stood against Emma in Toronto. But
It's
go ahead.
It's still good for the NDP. Unlike the East, where they were shut out, they are going to have Ontario representation, as are the Liberals. So it is good for the opposition, future opposition, in that respect.
Indeed. This is also very surprising, given that last general election, the NDP was fairly shut out of Ontario, with their strength mostly appearing out east. Now it seems that there's been a major regional shift, with the NDP with perhaps half, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less, of the NDP caucus hailing from Ontario. This might herald a new era for the NDP, given that its regional base has completely shifted from the last general election. But nonetheless, we shall now be moving past Ontario out west into the Prairies. And the first seat that we'll be declaring will be Prairies and Territories, which includes Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and the 3 Northern Territories. In this riding, you had Cranlett for the Liberals, who stood in the by-election, although has never been an MP before, so he's fairly new, with BHJR 132 for the NDP. He's their deputy leader, so he should be fairly considered to be a star candidate. And you have Das Puma for the UCP. And now in fact, all 3 of these candidates have led very active campaigns that have taken them throughout the riding in an attempt to canvass votes. And we'll see whose efforts have paid off as we go to the results. The result here is very close, but it is a victory for the UCP, in fact, with Das Puma polling 522,000 votes to BHJR's 469,000 and Cranlett's 351,000. Now, this is a very competitive riding, in fact, almost as competitive as Northern Ontario, but given that this is first past the post we're talking about, this is 1 seat more for the UCP on their quest for a majority. And it seems that despite last-minute efforts by both the Liberals and the NDP to shore up their support, they have fallen just a bit short and will be conceding the seat to the Conservatives. Teddy, your thoughts?
Yeah, we actually heard just a few days ago out of Winnipeg that this was going to be quite a close race. A week ago, it did not look like it was going to be close. We had an issue with Das Puma not only put on a good campaign, but had a strong record during the term in the House. Now, BHJR had a strong record in the House, but it was Cranlett who was really putting on that really strong campaign. It was only when BHJR came out in the closing days, came out swinging, that we really started to see things move. I think part of the reason that we are seeing this UCP victory here is that he just came out too late. I think had he come out earlier, we might be telling a different story tonight. But with the time that he came out and the lead that Das Puma had already built up by that point, we do see this, which is the second highest turnout in the country, and a win of only 4 percentage points.
Although it was very close, which is certainly not bad news for both parties on the left of the political spectrum, it is also not amazing news for the NDP, since their deputy leader has just gone down to Das Puma. And we'll be seeing a parliament perhaps without the NDP's deputy leader in it, depending on the results of the Western list. That's not a good place for the NDP to be in, but we'll see as the night goes along how many seats they'll end up with in the end. But first, before we go to the next result, we have former Prime Minister Phoenix 2 on the line. Can you hear me?
Hello, thank you.
Hello.
Can you-
Yes, we can hear you. Do you have anything to say about the results so far?
Well, I'm obviously not the most excited right now from our winning every vested into now we're at 2 right now, but I think we are pulling close where we did campaign strong in the end. I've been watching this. I haven't been too involved, but I think I am still quite happy. It was a hard situation to go in, and they did their best, and I think well for it.
Thank you. What do you think the results will be now that we're pretty much at the halfway point in the election?
I am struggling with the math to just see how the UCP honestly don't get a majority. I'm thinking, in my feeling, unless an upset happens, it will be that.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it looks.
Now, as a former prime minister during the past term, do you see this as a rejection of your policies personally, or do you see this as a broader trend of just support for the UCP or just a general desire for change?
Honestly, I don't think, to echo the rhetoric from the other former prime minister at the term, I don't think this is a rejection of our ideas. I think it's just we had a lot of trouble implementing them effectively. We honestly got bogged down a lot. Some of that getting bogged down, I am willing to blame myself on. And I think we also had a lot of great candidates just getting close to retirement. Like Polaris out in the East was kind of slowing down. He seemed like he wasn't really ready to continue for much longer, in my opinion, observing it. And I think Canadians will want these progressive ideas, but it'll have to come later at a time when our parties can reorganize, re-energize, and give them a good opposition.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was former Prime Minister Phoenix 2 calling in from Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island.
Gotta farm some potatoes now.
And good luck to you as well in your agricultural ventures.
Thank you.
In Alberta, this was a fairly, at least according to experts, this race is pretty much a foregone conclusion, with the UCP candidate Venom Big Boss, also known as Cam, enjoying a fairly sizable lead, both in terms of popular support and in terms of excitement from the audience while campaigning. This contrasts heavily with the NDP candidate Zhukov 236, who was not particularly active either during the term or on the campaign trail, and Liberal candidate Confident It, who is also relatively unknown in Canadian politics. The results here will be on in very shortly. And as expected, Venom Big Boss has won a very large victory with 1.1 million votes. In second place are the Liberals, polling 270,000 votes, and in third place is the NDP at 178,000 votes. Now, in the last general election, both northern and southern Alberta's ridings had been held by the NDP, so this is, again, a major regional shift in terms of political alignment. Last general election, the only seat in Alberta not to be held by the NDP was Calgary, which was held by the independent MP Wagbo, who often caucused with the Liberal Party. But it seems now both the Liberals and the NDP have been shut out, and the Conservatives have taken Alberta. Teddy, your reaction?
Well, this riding didn't have as much of a competitive race as some of the others that we've seen. It's the second lowest or third lowest turnout, second to the two ridings that were acclaimed. But the margin of victory here is quite astounding, especially when you consider, as Hurricane said, that this was NDP country. Canada's won with 71% of the vote, which is just slightly under the 72% that Dominion of Canada won in Erie. And 71% isn't something to sneeze at. I mean, 1 million votes in Alberta is definitely a mandate from Alberta.
And now, I believe we have the current Prime Minister, Ms. Emma, on the line. But before we go to patch her in, we first have some breaking news. CBC News can now confidently project that the United Conservative Party will form a majority government. Now, this was probably not a very big surprise given the margins that we've seen in Ontario and in the Prairies, but it is now the opinion of CBC that there is no viable path for either the Liberals or the NDP to deny the Conservative Party its majority, and it will, for the first time in quite a long while, we'll be seeing a majority government in Ottawa. Now, this is a major mandate for Smith and his Conservative Party, since they'll be able to implement measures and legislation irrespective of whether the left-wing opposition will agree. So this is a major win, and now we'll be hearing from some candidates before we go to the last writing. First, we'll be hearing from the current Prime Minister, Emma, and leader of the NDP. Hello? Can you hear us?
Hello.
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 So, CBC has just called the election for the Conservatives, and we believe that now they're very well on their path to a majority government. As the leader of the NDP and the incumbent government, what is your opinion on this?
Well, I'm obviously gutted. I was elected leader of the NDP at a time when no one wanted the job, and the previous NDP leader resigned suddenly, and I was thrusted into a lame duck situation where I was defending myself.
Right. If I recall correctly, you never really did have a chance to govern, since the opposition filed a motion of no confidence pretty much a few days after you came to power. So, what do you see this result as how would you interpret this result, basically? Do you see this as a rejection of the NDP, of progressivism, or just of the status quo?
I see it as I see it as a rejection of the NDP for being ineffective in its leadership to begin with, and failing to get down to the real matters of what Canadians want. We failed to govern sufficiently. We were thrust into government. We never asked for it. And then we had the politicking from the Liberals, who actually fought against us in this election, did hold any hands of friendship or wanted to collaborate at all. Basically put up their two fingers to us. And this is reflected in how the campaign went and how the results are coming in.
So what's next for the NDP?
We're going to rebuild. We're going to expel members that don't live up to the NDP values. And we're going to rebuild the party and show Canada what we're made of, and not let the bigoted views of the UCP come through and put people at risk.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was the Prime Minister phoning in from Toronto. Now we'll be getting a reaction from Venom Big Boss, who was the victorious UCP candidate in Alberta. Here to comment both on his own writing and on the results as a whole. Welcome.
Thank you, Hurricane. It's a pleasure being here this evening. I feel as if tonight a very decisive voice from Canadians was echoed across the country, and that brought about a consensus that we're looking for a government with lower taxes that's going to pursue creating effective and productive Canadian jobs that will allow you to have an actually sustainable lifestyle here. We were the only party this time who ran on supporting Canadian energy. We were the only party this time that ran on properly supporting small businesses and assuring that they're able to succeed in this volatile economic environment. And we were the only party that ran on effectively not the East versus the West. We're running on a message of national unity, and I took that to the doors across this province. You weren't seeing too many NDP campaigners, for example, outside of Calgary or Edmonton. So I think we have a province-wide mandate. We have a province-wide job, and we're going to take it quite proud to reflect that.
Thank you. So what's first? What's basically the first course of action that the UCP majority is going to take in Ottawa as they start their new term in government?
Well, the first UCP government steps is going to be, of course, assuring that with the majority we have, we'll be securing the throne speech, which has traditionally been a volatile environment in recent governments. Afterwards, we're going to likely begin moving on to our economic program to assure that money is getting back in Canadians' pockets, to assure that jobs are returning to our communities, to assure that there's confidence and security in living here, and making sure that our jurisdiction enjoys some of the most competitive tax benefits in the world. We used to have this advantage compared to the United States, and under previous governments, it has tremendously slipped, and I believe that is an opportunity lost, and the UCP has promised to make sure our tax regime is going to be competitive, and I hope to play a good part of that. Next, we'll be making sure that the energy sector is given adequate support. Once again, previous governments, due to either inability to function or ideological pursuits, have not adequately represented what Albertans need. We haven't had a pipeline to Tidewater in several years now. We've had governments that relentlessly attack our energy sector. We've had governments that believe it's best to be dictated what is to be done rather than be told by your constituents. So we're going to see a cultural shift in Ottawa after this general election, and it'll be a government that reflects the views of the broad majority of Canadians, and that's what we're seeing tonight.
Thank you. Now we will first, we believe we have a few more people on the line, but we will first be going to the last riding seat and giving the results. Now, this was a fairly unexpected race, since it was thought that just like the other two leaders, the UCP leader, Space Dude 2169, or Smith, would be unopposed and simply acclaimed to the seat of his native British Columbia. But an independent has come in to throw a wrench into those plans, and this independent, Archism, has actually run a fairly strong campaign in British Columbia. In fact, some say even stronger than Smith. And they may have turned UCP, BC, into a competitive seat rather than the cakewalk that the UCP thought was getting into. And we'll be seeing now the results and how they reflect the competitive nature of the campaign. Space Dude 2169 Smith has retained the seat for the Conservatives, polling 1.4 million votes, but Archism has run a very strong independent campaign, polling more than 1 million votes. Teddy, what do you make of this?
Well, this certainly is a surprise. These are a lot higher than the numbers that I was expecting to see. But I think what's happened here is all three parties had made that original plan to ignore the leaders' riding. And although we did see a little bit of campaigning in the seat, it seems that Smith was focused nationally. Now, you could argue there was a reason for that. Under a parallel system with a list system, with the leader on the first on the list, even if he had lost, he would still have a seat. And I think he knew that he was headed for a government, if not a majority. But this does show you cannot simply ignore your home riding and your home province. Add to that the fact that Archie here ran a very strong campaign. I mean, it's been a long time since I've seen an independent campaign this strong. And I think you start to understand why you end up with him having over 1 million votes and coming this close.
And now, before we go to the to the Western list, we have a few more guests on the line with us. First, we'll be starting with the UCP candidate in Northern Ontario, a broken hero, aka Barbara. Can you hear us?
Hello?
Hello.
Hello, okay, I'm on.
Yes. So, what is your take on the results so far?
I'm very happy, of course. It shows the people of Canada want stability and change. I am a little bit disappointed in the loss for me in Northern Ontario, but it was a very close campaign there, probably the closest in the nation, and I do want to congratulate both Red Wolf and Ito for their campaigns there. But I'm very excited for tonight.
Thank you. What do you think happened in Northern Ontario?
Honestly, I am not as big a figure as Red Wolf ever was. Red Wolf was former prime minister. I only entered parliament in the last by-election for Ontario before I moved up to Thunder Bay and recently and ran in Northern Ontario.
But now that the UCP has a majority mandate in Ottawa, what do you think should be the first step that this government takes? Should it be in terms of finance, foreign policy, energy?
Those are all very important. I want to make a big deal of our economic policy and not creating a system of tax which robs the money from the people and instead lets them keep their own money.
All right. Well, as you can see, as you've seen in the results so far, this has pretty much been a consistent blue wave from coast to coast to coast. So what do you think this says about Canadians' mandate for the UCP?
It shows that we're ready for change. We have been dealing with instability coming from the left, and people are sick of it.
Thank you. That was a broken hero, aka Barbara, who is calling in from Thunder Bay, Ontario. And now we are joined finally by the leader of the Liberal Party, Mr. Survive, and the newly elected MP for Quebec, who is calling us today from Drummondville, Quebec. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So, what do you think this night? How do you think this night went for the Liberals? Is this a good result? A bad result?
I would definitely say that this is a bad result for the Liberals. However, I'm not sure how to. However, I think that this could still be counted as a result that shows that the Liberals are still a force that is willing to fight for Canadians at the national stage. The UCP has obviously just won a majority government. Now it's up to them. Canadians have elected them and given them a mandate to make sure to implement their policies, and it'll be up to them to do so. I'm happy to work with them. I and the Liberal caucus are happy to work with them in order to better Canada. However, we will definitely oppose them where they're destructive, and we will make sure to stand up for our individual constituents as well as all Canadians in Parliament.
So how do you view this result? Why do you think Canadians voted so largely for the UCP? Do you see this as simply a mandate for change, or do you see this as something else?
I see this as something else. Both other parties, other than the UCP, were in historically weak positions. The Liberals lost half of our membership in our caucus midway through the term, and we also had last Parliament ended. I don't think that this election came under hospitable situations for either the NDP or my own Liberals. But I think that the UCP put up a strong campaign everywhere, and I think that has that has essentially given rise to a new wave of populism that I think will shape Canadian politics for generations to come. It's just to be seen where it will take us. Will it make us a more inclusive country? Will it continue the change that we've seen that's worked, or will it be a reaction that will move us backwards and will reverse some of the change we've seen? Will it reverse the momentum in equality? Will it help democracy? That all remains to be seen.
Right. But right now, in both regional lists that we've seen and in the national popular vote, the Liberals have edged out the NDP, which is the opposite result of what polling at the start of the campaign was indicating. Do you see this as a bit of good news for the Liberals? And do you see this as something you can build upon?
I think so. I think it shows that Canadians are fundamentally willing to listen to Liberals, and they're willing to understand that Liberals stand up for them wherever they are. And even though our momentum was not strong enough to overcome the NDP, I think we should have a good and effective term as the opposition party in this country, both working with and standing up to the UCP.
Thank you. That was Mr. Survive, the Liberal leader from Drummondville, Quebec. And not finally, but we are now going into the last regional list of this election, which is the Western list, which covers the Prairies, BC, and the Northern Territories. Now, according to polling, this is the one region where the NDP is ahead of the Liberals. According to the Global News poll from December the 13th, the UCP is ahead at 42%, with the NDP trailing a bit at 31%, and the Liberals in third place at 26%. However, this is the smallest UCP plurality between all three lists, and depending on if the last day's campaigning has changed anything, we could be in for a surprise. But let's see. Well, the UCP has decreased a bit, and the NDP has gained and the Liberals have gained a bit, although they are still in third place. The NDP is in second at 30%, and the UCP is first at 41%. Now, because all three parties have roughly received a similar amount of votes, all three have gained a list seat, so this does not help any party outpace any of the others. However, this also means that the UCP has finally reached the magic number of 11 seats. It is now guaranteed that the UCP will be heading to Ottawa next term with a majority government of at least 11 MPs, and perhaps more, depending on how the national list turns out. Teddy.
Now, there's some very interesting numbers that I'm hearing here, and they're still counting the final few ballots. We're going to have to see how it plays out. But according to the math that I have, we got people running all these calculations. It's quite possible that on that national leveling list, that you're almost certainly going to see at least one NDP and at least one Liberal, but, and this is interesting, that last third leveling seat is neck and neck between the NDP and the UCP, and that could make the difference between a narrow majority and a comfortable majority, and it could make the difference in who is the official opposition. This last seat that it's coming down to could be all the difference, and I will definitely be keeping a close eye on that as we get to those national results.
Thank you. But yes, as we head into the national leveling results, it might first be worth noting that so far, the UCP enjoys a very large plurality in terms of the popular vote, and they've won all but one of the contested ridings. And the Liberals currently lead the NDP by a rather significant amount in the popular vote, which clearly indicates a major shift away from the NDP, which started out this term as the largest party and was in government for quite a few months. We shall now be heading into the Western recap. Now, in the Western recap, just because there was not a very major difference in terms of popular vote, all three parties have gained a list seat. But in terms of the riding, it was a clean sweep for the UCP, which brings back memories of the 1980s with the Western alienation and a massive backlash from the West against the NDP and the Liberals, both of which had parliamentary representation in this region of Canada before the election, and now seem to be left with no ridings, but still some representation on the list. Teddy, what's your opinion?
Now, I have here with me the list. All three Western List candidates for the UCP have been elected in their ridings. So what that means is you're actually going to see not just Time Walker, but people like Barkathian, who was leader in the last election, is going to come back into Parliament. But interestingly, what this means is because BHJR is winning his seat here on that Western List, is that NDP seat on the leveling list that we are certain they have at least one is going to be taken by Adelfred. And Adelfred will be able to return to Parliament. So we'll have all three of the Northern Ontario candidates in Parliament.
That is very interesting, in fact, especially it's also rather unexpected, given that we're already so far ahead in Western Canada. But that's going to make for some interesting dynamics in Parliament, especially since all three candidates in Northern Ontario were very strong.
Oh, my apologies. I've just been told that Adelfred did not run in Northern Ontario. He's run in Southern Ontario. I apologize for getting the two mixed up. It's been a long...
Okay. And now we can go to the leveling seats. Teddy, do you mind giving us a brief explanation of what the leveling seats are for our viewers?
Yes, because each region only has 3 seats, it is very difficult mathematically to ensure the end result matches the popular vote. These 3 leveling seats are therefore there so that the end result of our list matches as closely as possible the popular.
Thank you. So, in terms of leveling seats, let's now look at whether the NDP might be able to win that second seat and form opposition. Unfortunately, it seems they may have fallen a bit short of that goal.
What a result!
As the UCP has won that seat in question. Both the Liberals and the NDP won a leveling seat, neither of which was unexpected, but the last one has gone to the UCP, which firmly cements the Liberal Party and Vibe as the opposition and the leader of the opposition, respectively, and makes the end results in the NDP going from a minority government to 3rd place. When was the last time this happened in Canadian politics, Teddy?
Well, we've had majorities under Harper, but what's really interesting here is these numbers. I am amazed at some of these numbers we're seeing. Let me tell you, the Liberals have taken 4,721,869 votes across the country. But what really is important here is this margin between the UCP and the NDP. The UCP has 7,079,401, but the NDP with 3,539,694. What that means, Hurricane, what that means is that last list seat was decided by 7 votes. That's how close this was.
That's absolutely incredible. And it just cements how strong the UCP showing has been throughout the country in this election. The fact that they've managed to pull off such an impressive victory by 7 votes, no less, is testament to the strength of their campaign, to their ability to turn out the vote across the country and to get Canadians to agree to their message of essentially generational change between an entire term of leftist and center leftist governments towards one based in conservative free market principles.
Indeed, and I wanted to correct something I'd said earlier. Adelfred, yes, has won this finalist seat, but it's Vanilla Donut who has won that last Liberal seat that you're looking at. So you will have all three Southern Ontario candidates will be in the Parliament. I apologize for misspeaking earlier.
That's a strong showing for Ontarians in this new Parliament, then. So to recap, our next Parliament will look like this. The UCP has a majority of 2 seats, with 12 seats in total. The Liberals are in second place with 5, forming the official opposition, and the NDP has been reduced from a minority government to 4 seats and second opposition status.
Okay, I just want to update you, and here's something that's developing. We're hearing calls for a recount because it's 7 votes. We're going to go live now to the recount center. Right, they've recounted all 15 million ballots. It remains a 7-vote margin.
Interesting. So it looks like although that result was not going to change the government, it does show that it does give the UCP a larger margin for error now, since they've won with a majority of 2 seats. So this should make for a fairly interesting parliament. It'll be our first majority since the Harper government was in place. Oh, or my bad, since the Justin Trudeau government was in place for the 2 years that it was before he tragically resigned for personal reasons and moved to Cuba with the Castros. So there you have it. You have a strong majoritarian UCP government that will have free rein to implement any policies that it's campaigned on, including fairly controversial ones regarding cutting taxes and supporting Albertan energy and pipelines, especially when it comes to objections from coastal provinces like British Columbia and Quebec. What this also means is that a new government will be in place to deal with many of the crises that have emerged in recent months in Canadian politics, such as perhaps a final solution to the reservation crisis that has unfolded in Ontario after the Lieutenant Governor denied assent to Doug Ford's law to cut Toronto City Council by half. So Teddy, what do you think we'll be expecting to see in the next Parliament?
Well, we're definitely going to see the UCP implementing their. It's interesting. With 12 seats, they could afford it. It does seem one of their members is in line, perhaps, for this. But it does seem that even after that, they will retain a working majority of the members, and I do think that they will be able to present a fairly unified agenda. We have heard some rumblings of discontent within the party, but that seems to be isolated to a small section within. So we basically will be seeing conservatives, as Stephen Harper once put it, a strong national conservative majority government or something to that effect.
It'll certainly be interesting as we begin the new term to see what policies and what laws Smith will be prioritizing, whether he'll be starting off as other people we've had on the show so far have suggested with the economy and finance, or whether he'll be tackling major issues such as foreign policy, with the recent Russian incursion into the Ukraine being a major talking point throughout the campaign, or maybe he'll be focusing on something else, such as finally getting a pipeline to either the Atlantic or the Pacific, either of which will certainly face very strong opposition from either BC or Quebec. So there we have it. We have the next Parliament of Canada with a UCP majority. This is the first time the UCP has been in government since its founding in 2017, and in 2018, and It'll be to be seen what they'll be prioritizing in their throne speech when it comes out. Now, the throne speech might be delayed until January because Parliament is soon about to embark on its Christmas break. But other than that, the results of the election are on the screen right now. And unless you have anything else to add, Teddy, this is the conclusion of our broadcast.
The only thing that I really have to add is that I think, looking back at this election, I think that despite some of the chaos that was prevalent from the outside, that this has been one of the most well-run elections that I've seen. But beyond that, that this parliament, I have not seen an election result in a parliament this strong that I can ever remember. This is going to be an amazingly strong parliament, and I am definitely looking forward to the days to come.
Me too. And now, I'm Hurricane for CBC live in Toronto. This has been Teddy, likewise for CBC in Toronto. And this concludes our election live stream. Thank you for tuning in. And before we go, I would just like to say a few things. We are not affiliated with the CBC, the NDP, the Liberal Party, or any other group that we have mentioned in this broadcast. This is a simulation for the game CMHOC on Reddit. So if you're a lawyer watching this, please do not sue us. Thank you. Have a good evening.
And if you're interested in playing, drop by to r/CMHOC. CMHOC.
Then bring your vaccines because they're in short supply.
Thank you. Thank you. And this concludes our broadcast. Have a good evening, everyone.
Tory attack!
Enjoy your soul.
RIP headphone users.
Like me. Ow.
Good job. That was good.
That was amazing. Do you like that recount bit?